Hello, welcome back to the studio. Today we're working on a Bob Ross classic. But it's not. It's a Steve Ross classic. That's right, change of artist, but the style is very reminiscent of Bob's, of course. But there are a few little touches that I know Steve likes to put into his paintings, and a few little touches that I've put in. And of course, the original painting was called Mountain Oval. Except it's not, is it? What should we call it? A square with an oval? An oval with a square? You decide, but sit back and watch as I complete this whole painting. Lots of top tips and 1 or 2 pickles as well.
So here's my canvas, 16 inches by 20, and I have it set as a portrait style. I've also been doing some fancy masking tape. We'll see how that works out later on. And the brand I've been using is this one, Meeden. And I'll be doing a review of one of their easels later on in the video. First things first, let's set out the horizon line. I turn to my old favourite, a pencil and one of my brushes. I want it a little below halfway. I'll be using some of this Bob Ross liquid white oil paint, because this is a wet on wet oil painting technique, no acrylics today. I'm going to use this old 1-inch Bob Ross landscape brush. Take a small amount from an airtight container, and I want to just spread this over my canvas. I want to cover the entire canvas with a thin, even coat. I find it easier sometimes to just divide my canvas into 4 sections. But take care, we don't want to brush that liquid white under the tape, so brush in from the edge. Once you've got everything covered with a thin, even coat, finish off with some nice long flat strokes, and then do the fingertip test. It's essential you don't overload your canvas with liquid white. You want just enough to make our fingerprints show. Top tip, don't forget to rub out the evidence. I also want to use this brush again, but not all this liquid white on it, so dry clean it on a paper towel. Here's my palette and the first few colours I'll be using. The first of those colours is alizarin crimson. I take a small amount on that old 1-inch brush with the liquid white on it, and I want to think about putting in a nice sort of pinkish glow. This is a mountain scene, and I want this pinkish colour to pop up behind the mountain. I use crisscross strokes because I don't want to have any hard stripes or lines. They're much harder to get rid of. Keep in mind where the mountain's going to sit in your painting. And of course, it wouldn't be a Bob Ross classic if it didn't have some water in it. Don't forget, brush in from the edges because, well, if you do that and go centre out, you end up with a very hard mark. It's actually quite difficult to get rid of. Pull from the edges to the centre, and I leave a little sort of light area through the centre. Maybe looks like a shimmer of light. My next colour is going to be sort of a lavendery blue colour. With the crimson on my brush, I go straight into some phthalo blue. But careful now, it's a strong colour, so just tease a little bit down and mix it on the palette. I do a little and I stand back. And I make sure these 2 colours sort of shake hands a lot. I don't want, again, a hard line. Once more, I add this colour into the water as well for a reflection. Here you see, I just brush across sometimes as well. But top tip, dry clean your brush well, without using thinners. If you get thinners on the brush and then that gets on your painting, well, it's going to be tears before bedtime. My next colour is phthalo blue with a little touch of black. I test my colour in the corners of my painting at this stage. If the colour's too strong, I can stop and dry clean my brush, and then carry on blending. Notice again, no hard lines here. I stood back and decided that I needed to add a hint more dark to this corner. Why, you say? We'll see later on in the painting. It becomes more obvious. The last step, of course, for the background is to add the same colours into the water. Let's start looking at some clouds. And these long stringy ones are called cirrus clouds or mare's tail. You often see them very high in the sky. I start with a little bit of grubby white paint, and I go for a sort of nice or soft angled stroke here. I do a little bit, and as you see from the little reference photograph, That's the effect I'm looking for. These sort of long streaks of silvery clouds. I'll add a little more white to my brush, try and make them show up a little bit more. You can see now one of the challenges I have with my sky. I think it would have been better had I made the background sky just a hair stronger. And that's the reason why a little bit more blue and black might have been useful. But top tip, don't just keep adding more white paint. Before you know where you are, you'll just have a pale white sky. If you've watched any of my previous paintings, you'll know it's time for a little planning. That's right, I like to know where to position things in my painting. This time I want to work out where the peak of my mountain is going to be, about a third the way from the left hand side of my canvas. And I use the point of my palette knife just to scratch on an outline. If I don't like it, I can always use my fan brush and just smudge it out again. This is a very useful technique for planning your work. Here's another very useful thing to do, is to remove surplus white paint. Now I know where the mountain's going to be, I can add another cloud. I use just the corner of my fan brush with a nice amount of titanium white paint. I use little letter C shapes. Just touch and a little flick to create this lovely bobble top sort of cloud. Try not to make it look sort of too much like a snake though. It happens by mistake sometimes. I also make sure that as I run out of paint, I sort of do the lower part of my cloud, so it looks like a little bit of a shadow. You see, I let my paint run out to the side of the canvas, and that will become important later on in the painting. I did all of this cloud with just one loading of the brush. It's amazing how far a little bit of paint will go. Now let's soften the cloud a little. I use a nice clean dry 1-inch brush, nice and soft, and just do some little taps with it. I don't touch the very top of the cloud, that's the silver lining, but just blend ever so lightly. If you overdo it, you lose all the lovely detail you see in this cloud. I also think I should carry the cloud to the other side of the mountain. I think this looks a bit better. Here's another tip. Don't have the cloud coming out the peak of your mountain. It'll look like a volcano. There. Time to paint the mountain though. I take blue, black and the alizarin crimson on my palette and I mix them very well. I want a really lovely dark inky purple colour for my mountain. I'll put it up here out the way. I take a small roll of that dark colour and I want to be using this to stain my canvas. I use my finger on the back of the palette knife and I press well into the painting. I do this because I want to force the paint down into the grain of the canvas, or in this case my paper canvas, but it's still got texture. I press it in and remove the surplus paint as I go. I'll remove that along the side of the mountain. I try not to make my mountain look too symmetrical. I break up the entry and exit points for the mountain on the left and right hand sides. The other thing I also like to do is keep the peak of the mountains as dark as possible. I don't want to take any of the darkness away from up there, but I do want to have a lovely soft blended base to it. I don't drag too much of the paint down to this area. And as you see, my mountain already starts to look a little bit three-dimensional. Now let's think about the shape of the mountain. Coming forward, I want a ridge. To the right hand side, a skier would be in sunglasses, with the sun coming from the right corner. From the left, he'd have his jumper on. He'd be in the shadows, in the cool. This helps us decide where to put the snow and the shadow colours. For my snowy highlights, I take titanium white and I tint it with just a touch of red. I want it to look almost off-white, with a pinkish sort of glow to it. On the left side, well, I'm going to add a little bit of the mountain colour and a little touch of dark sienna to sort of grey it slightly. We'll see if that one works out later on because, well, you'll see something in my painting which I think a lot of people get wrong, but that's to come. You saw I loaded my palette knife with a little roll of paint and I touched the canvas very gently and angle the blade of the knife downwards. Steve Ross had a particular style. He used to shake the knife as he went down the mountain, and I'm doing my best to show you the technique. As he did the shake, the paint would break. Here you see that same little shaking action. You might find it useful for your own mountain paintings, but always make sure you finish with a nice long stroke. Let's have a go at this little peak. Again, another small roll of titanium white paint. But you see, I didn't quite get close enough to the sky. I left this black outline. Didn't on the main peak. And I think that's something which I like to see, my snow touching the sky, at least at the top of the peaks. If you have a black outline all the way around the mountain, well, it doesn't look so good. The mountain almost looks like it's been outlined in black. Don't worry about that little mishap. We'll fix that later on. Now let's add some shadow to my mountain. This is the colour I mixed. I come up behind the snow on the right, touch and slide to the left. That same little bouncing action. But what do you think of my colour choice? I think these are too similar. The highlight and shadow are too close in value. Let's fix this. Always start by removing paint. If something doesn't work out, don't try and paint over it. You'll just get yourself in more of a pickle. Also, if you're repairing your mountains, put back the base dark layer before you start trying to add a new colour. This colour is far too pale. I'll remix it with a little bit more of the blue-black colour from the mountain base and some sienna. You can see my first colour as well, almost just pale blue. Touch and go. I'll add this new colour to my mountain peaks and then do a little stand back. Once you've done a little bit, it's always better to walk away from your painting and turn your back at it just for a moment. I think it may be too dark now. I went too far the other way, but it's actually easier now just to lighten the colour slightly rather than try and take something that's too pale and darken it up. Again, this is just something I learned from experience. Now, let's bring this peak on the left forward in the painting. Again, we're just playing with highlight and shadow. Now here's a top tip you must absolutely try. Pick up a little bit of that dark base colour we made and use it to sort of sweeten up some of the edges of your mountain. You can take a straight edge and just add a little bit of extra dark colour underneath it. This will really make your mountains pop. I think this is just such a nice touch, and you should enjoy playing with the paint and of course moving mountains. And the final touch, let's deal with these sort of marks I made with the palette knife. I'm just going to use a nice 1-inch brush just to tap them out. I'll turn this into a nice misty area. Unfortunately, this won't be the last time I have to do this. That's right. This is a Pickle Alert. My problem started when I decided to add a little bit of a green touch to the foothills. Sap green into that sort of shadowy grey colour. I'll use a nice brush to do this, but I'm not sure about this colour. What do you think? I'll add a little and then make a decision on it. I'm really not sure. Maybe if I keep adding more, it will look better. Maybe some snowy effects would fix it. No. The answer is, my painting has truly come off the rails. Time to stop.
Well, as you saw in that last little sequence, I went off the rails with my painting, didn't I? I got myself into such a pickle. And it took seconds. 1 minute I was flying, the next minute, wow, it was crash and burn for my painting. And the reason why it happened? Well, I didn't stop soon enough. I picked a colour which was not quite right, and instead of sort of putting one exploratory dab on and then stopping and having a look. Well, I just simply blasted away with that brush and hope for the best. If you're a hit and hope sort of painter and then sort of concerned you're not getting the results that you want, then take my advice. Try a couple of dabs with a brush, stand back and have a look at it, and then if it's not right, fix it then. Don't do what I did and carry on painting hoping that it's going to magically get better. I can promise you, it rarely ever does. In fact, I can't remember the last time it did. So let's see how I fix my painting and then carry on using the right colour and maybe the right brush.
So now we know where we went wrong. And the only advice I can give is always take off the paint. Just painting over the top, endlessly trying to fix it, it never works. So here you see, I have to go back a few steps, but it is slowly coming back to me. You just have to grit your teeth and do the repairs. Can you tell how long it took me to repaint this section of my painting? You might be surprised. It actually took longer than expected. So let's consider our options a little more carefully. Well, we know the 1-inch brush was just, a bit too big, wasn't it? I really need something a little bit more delicate. A fan brush, I think, is what I'm going to try next. I mix up a fresh colour, not a mixture of different things. Sap green, black, touch of phthalo blue. Here we have a much cleaner, nicer colour with no light tones in it. And that's important because sometimes we make muddy colours and then add a new colour to it, but it's still going to just be mud. So refresh your palette. Here you see I tested my colour on the palette a little bit. I add a little bit to my painting. I stand back. I add a little bit more and stand back, and by doing it in small chunks I get a chance to assess my work before I go too far wrong. Once then I'm happy, apart from a slightly sloping waterline, I feel more confident that the technique I'm using is producing the painting I want. There. Now let's just add a few reflections. Again, I'm using my fan brush for this. Just pull down a little bit of paint. I smooth it down with a nice dry cleaned 1-inch brush, and then I brush across gently. Don't forget, if you go across it too many times, you'll end up blurring it too much. A little blob of paint there. I'll fix that in a minute. I want to add one more feature to my distant bank. Some very small fir trees. I've got some areas here which aren't so heavily green that this little fir tree won't show up. Again, I was thinking ahead slightly here. I'll start off by tapping in the centre lines as always, and using the corner of my fan brush I just press up gently to create these little smiles, like a little bunch of umbrellas standing on their points. Remember, this is just a small detail, but nevertheless important. In Steve Ross's original painting, he did lots of coloured bushes and bigger trees, and it didn't really fit with my design for this painting. So you make the decision as to what you want for your own scene. If you enjoy my tutorials, don't forget, reach down, hit the little thumbs up button. It doesn't cost anything, but it tells YouTube I'm doing something you're enjoying, and other people will get to see it too. Thank you. Now, let's add a touch of highlight to these little background trees. As you saw, I went into some cadmium yellow, touch of sap green on a dry clean fan brush. The right side of my trees will see a little bit more highlight than the left. Once again, this is a small detail. Don't get these trees too bright. They're a long way away across the other side of a lake. To finish it off, I want to add a waterline. And here you can see that my white paint, well, it's pretty pink. But that's perfect. It matches the colour of the sky. Notice how I press down into the canvas with my palette knife and slide it along. I want to leave just the suggestion of a little bit of brightness for a waterline. My water is flat still and it wants to be level. So make sure you don't go up or downhill. I'll finish off with the edge of my blade of my knife and I'll fix that little blob of paint as well. Maybe it's a fish leaving a ripple. Now here comes a top tip for you. When you peel this masking tape off, you'll end up with a nice sticky ball covered in paint. The best thing you can use is a little piece of paper towel. Screw it all up and make it into a nice neat little ball you can dispose of more carefully. The other important thing is to make sure you've got a decent easel, which is where this week's sponsor comes in. I was recently contacted by Meeden Art Supplies and they said, "Do you want to try one of our easels out?" And I said, "Sure." They supplied this easel free of charge. And here you see I'm assembling one of their lightweight aluminium desktop easels. It only took me a couple of minutes to assemble it and I was ready to paint. It comfortably accommodates canvases up to 25 inches and it easily holds one of my 20x16s that you see me paint on a regular basis. Another nice feature is that you can actually sit the canvas back a little further on the rest. I position the canvas, get it nice and level, and just give it a little bit of a downward press, and that's it. It's got a nice firm grip. As I mentioned, it sits far enough back so you can reach the top and bottom of your canvas. That's a definite bonus. The other bonus is that it comes with a little hanging hook. It means you can hang your painting on the wall whilst it's drying. Better still, there's even a 10% discount. Happy Painter 10. Link in the description below. Now, let's paint ourselves some nice bushes. I've got an old Bob Ross 1-inch landscape brush. Notice how I pull it through that lovely dark green colour in one direction. I create a lovely stippled effect on my palette. Notice how I really press and spring the bristles apart. It's important that the brush is open and lacy. As I press the brush on the canvas, I make sure I leave a little imprint of the bristles, but I don't let the brush skid. I just press. Here's a nice close-up angle for you. Again, pressing, working round as though it were a clock face. As you notice, the back of the brush doesn't move, it stays put. The bristles spring apart and then I let the brush come back to centre again. It's important that you don't let the brush skid. It creates sort of a smudge and I want texture. This texture is going to make the next layer stick more easily. Here you see I switch to a nice clean dry brush. Once again I go through a highlight colour. I press and open the brush, make it nice and open and lacy. I loaded it rounded side to the top. Now with gentle pressure I put the highlights on my bushes. As Bob would often repeat, a thin paint will stick to a thick paint. Here the dark green colour is thick and sticky and the highlight colour is thinner and oily. I reload and do another very gentle bush shape. If you find the paint doesn't come off, it means either your underpainting is too thin and oily or your highlight colour is too thick. You'll also notice how when I use the brush, the canvas bounces a little. It softens the touch. You'll also notice I leave a few dark spots here and there. But that's it. Time to stop. Leave it alone. I stand back and think I can see one more bit. Yes, I know what I said, but don't you do it. Now, let's add some nice trees. This is definitely your bravery test. Once again, I plan the position by using the point of my knife just to scratch the centre line of the tree. Now you can see why I didn't put a great deal of snow at the end of my mountain. Again, I was thinking ahead. I want two nice silver birches here. I take a small roll of Van Dyke brown paint and with a small touch and a slight sideward flick, I start the process of putting in the trunk. Keep it small to start with. We can always make it wider, but once it gets too wide, well, it's very difficult to repair it. So start small, maybe a bit spindly looking, and then you can always go back and make it slightly wider. Again, do a little and stand back. To highlight my birches, I use some of this grubby off-white paint. It's got a little bit of sienna mixed in with it. I'll probably add a little bit of yellow and green to it too. A small roll of paint is all you need, and this requires a very, very quick touch. As you see, I roll the brush around the tree trunk and then lift off. As soon as the knife starts moving, I'm already lifting. This way, it means I put the paint down and I only pick up a small amount of the brown colour. You see, nope, I've run out of paint. I'll do some little touches of highlight on this silver birch too. With practice, you can get very good at this. It's the reason why I keep my trees, well, a little bit on the spindly side. I can always come back and fix them. I've added a touch of phthalo blue to some white. Here you see I'm putting on a tiny, tiny touch of blue to the left side of my tree. It's called referred light. Light that bounces back from elsewhere in the scene. It really helps your little silver birches to stand out. Now let's try and paint some branches. I add a drop of linseed oil to my Van Dyke brown. I'm going to use a liner brush. Notice how I hold it right at the very far end. I paint with the very, very tip of the brush and just gently wiggle. These little upward flicks are again a very characteristic way that Steve Ross would paint these birch tree limbs. I do the little upward flicks all over the tree, and I also do a few little branches that cross in front of the trunk. Again, very much a characteristic of Steve's work. I know a lot of people have trouble painting these branches. It took me a long time and a lot of practice, but eventually I got it. Now I can do it. I find doing more branches easy, but with that can be a problem. You can just put on too many. So once again, do a few, stand back, add a few more, and then stand back. I'll add a little tiny touch of white highlight to this branch as well. Now, you need to do something about where the tree came out of the bushes. And of course, Bob would always say, add a few little touches of highlight, keep his feet warm. For the final touch, I use the edge of my palette knife. I want to add a few little blades of grass here and there. These final details really elevate the quality of your painting. So add a few scratchy sticks and twigs as well. When you're happy, you can sign it. And with that, I have a finished painting, a Steve Ross classic, Mountain Oval.
So there you have it, a Steve Ross classic, Mountain Oval. Or is it? I'm just not sure. But don't move, there's some more lovely videos for you to watch coming right along. What shall we call it? Square with an oval? An oval square? I know, we'll call it a squoval.